Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we are discussing open source in GIS. So GIS mapping software, geoinformation systems, often relies on components or even full tools or even full software packages that are open source. So what is open source and what is the benefit of using open source tools and software? Open source, I'm just reading Wikipedia at the moment, is a source code that is made freely available for possible modification and redistribution, meaning that if you have a GIS package or a tool that is open source, that you can actually view and modify the code. A great example is QGIS, which is the desktop GIS that many people use. This tool, basically a software package that you can use as a desktop application. Many of these tools in here you can actually use for free. You can use this entire platform for free, but there's a bunch of plugins, for example, that you can use, meaning that you can actually add in your own installations, like your own packages, and you can actually use like your own code in here as well, since you can install a plugin and then share that with other people as well. That's one of the main concepts in open source, is the fact that you can use the code, see the code, understand how the code works. That's all public, basically. That's what makes the source open. Additionally, you can modify the code, meaning that you actually can add in your own code, your own tools, your own plugins, for example. Now, open source is a decentralized software development model that encourages open collaboration, meaning that open source actually has to facilitate many open standards as well. So if everyone was to work with open source, but there were no standards in the industry, everyone could, well, obviously use like each other's softwares and each other components. However, the big benefit of open source, especially in GIS, is that many concepts and many formats are standardized. So an example is, I actually have a list right here of the TU Delft who use 3D geoinformation, and right there they have a list of GIS software and libraries. So starting off, they actually have QGIS in this list as well. So that is a GIS package that indeed is open source. You can know everything about the code if you would want to. You could develop your own plugins and tools on top of the platform as well if you were to want to do that. However, there are many open standards that integrate with each other, meaning that you are not just limited to using, for example, QGIS or your WebGIS like GeoWebs or Felt, because you're actually able to use your own open source platform. In other words, you're able to redistribute the data to other platforms as well and have them integrate with each other nicely. So if I were to use data in QGIS, I could also use it in GeoWebs or Felt, for example, which is great because that means that I do not have to worry about transforming the data into different sources or in different formats. I mean, obviously, if I use a format that is not open source or is not standardized, then I may still have to export it to a different format. But at least I know that they both have overlaps in the formats that they do use, right? So anything I use in QGIS has a particular format. For example, let's say I just saw GeoTIFF, a GeoTIFF format. I know that since GeoWebs, for example, is also built on open source components, that I can use this format in my GeoWebs application, which is great. Another example would be the geospatial data abstraction library, where you can use various raster formats. This actually has a plugin in QGIS. So this is a translator library for raster and vector geospatial data formats, meaning, in other words, I actually can just transform geospatial data. That's what this tool or package is used for. And since the code is open, I mean, I really know like how it works. I have all of that knowledge is pretty much public. That's pretty much what it comes down to. Because if you were to really break it down very simply, code is knowledge, and that knowledge now is public, meaning people do not have to pay or worry about making this same software because well, they can use it for free and use the code, uh, reuse the code, modify the code, which is the big benefit of using open source stuff on top of the fact that you can actually integrate it with different platforms. So here we have the GDAL library and all of the standardized tools from that library in QGIS as well, which is great. And there are many, many, many more examples like quick OpenStreetMap I made a video on previously. Here there is a services plugin from the Dutch geodata portal that we can actually quickly upload data into QGIS, for example, and then maybe share it to Felt or GeoWebs from here as well, because well, all the formats are standardized, so that is really great. I mean, standardized formats is not equal to open source. It can be, not always the case. There are still formats that are some sort of have some sort of standard to them, but are not by definition open source. However, you can see the benefit of using open source in general. At least that's what I hope for. So here we have another list of open source. I mean, if you want to know more about particular packages or particular data formats, you could obviously Google that and find the specific things that you want to know, like maybe there's different software programs that you want to know more about. Otherwise you can join the community, school.com/GIS. I'll put a link in the bio. I'll put a link in the description and you'll be able to join from there. Um, Moreover, in this community, you can actually book a call with me and I can help you out if you have some sort of question. Anyways, going on, here we have GeoWebs, which is the product that I am affiliated in because, well, I work for this company. Here we have a bunch of integrations as well, which is kind of like, as I said, the benefit of open source, right? You can integrate different data sources or different software packages into each other, which is just a big benefit because that means you are no longer locked in to one company or one software product that you continuously have to pay for because, well, you're locked into this situation where you know, oh, there's other tools out there for, say, transforming data, visualizing data, and whatnot. And now you have to open up different browser tabs or they're just not integrated well. Or maybe you can not even use particular features that you could otherwise use. So it's very important that you use open source applications or at least applications that are based on open source standards. GeoWebs being an example of this. There's also a bunch of integrations that you have right here. So here there's the land registry inspection tool. There's GeoServer, so one of the most widely used open source GIS servers that makes it easy to manage your data. Well, all of the data is pretty much hosted onto this open source GIS server, meaning on those standards. So every standard that is supported by GeoServer automatically is pretty much able to be standardized on GeoWebs, or able to you can use those standards in GeoWebs. Moreover, there's all sorts of different integrations, even Street View, even Street Smart, if people are familiar with that, but Google Street View, just literally being able to use Street View within your application, OpenStreetMap location server, so actually being able to search for OpenStreetMap locations within the application. All sorts of things that just make your life much easier because you're just no longer worrying about having to search through different platforms and different browser tabs. Everything can just simply be integrated in one or maybe multiple applications. At least you know that you can use data from one application into another. The same thing is what Felt, the flagship sponsor of QGIS, does. As you can see, they also display the GDAL logo on there, the QGIS logo, because once again they also use many open source components, making it just much easier to work with. GeoServer, as I just mentioned, server for sharing geospatial data which is open source once again. So what happens is people plug in their database or they plug in literally hosted data sets like actual files, upload those, and on GeoServer you can host those and make sure that they are serve, transformed into services that you can then use in different applications. So standardized services such as web map services, web feature services, web coverage services, and honestly I don't know what the P stands for. Vector files, databases, servers, I mean, it goes both ways, right? Those can also be the inputs and raster data that you can actually upload, like GeoTIFF once again. And once again, you can then upload them as services, or even use them into Google applications, use them as raster data, etc., etc. I hope you see the benefit of open source. Here we have Esri. Esri is also using many open source components. However, there are some nuances there, where like many of their applications do not use open source. Many of their applications are built solely on ArcGIS components as well, meaning they are not always open source. Some standards have become more published and they share right here. There's 350 open source projects shared on GitHub. However, there's also a lot of actual like customized ArcGIS applications, meaning you would somewhat be locked in into using the application depending on which one you use. And many data that you then plug into your ArcGIS project then isn't used like the way in GeoServer would be used or in Felt or GeoApps would be used, is not available as a web map service or web feature service, but only as a Esri features info service, meaning that you could only plug that data into a different Esri application, ArcGIS application, rather than being able to use those into, say, a GeoServer based application. That's not always the case, obviously. ArcGIS or like Esri applications often still use open source components that do allow for these services to be the output, but many times open data is just not that open, right? It's still not published as a web map service, web feature service, or anything else. So I hope that's been valuable, and that's all for today.